probably see that in your line down. And at 4 o'clock, we should get joined by a few people registering. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to VIA Sponsorship 2020, the second in our webinar series as part of our replacement for our conference due to have taken place in 2020. I'd like to welcome all of the guests who've already registered for the conference. It's an interactive conference and we have got some great speakers lined up today and next week and the following week. I'll introduce our speakers in the next couple of minutes, but just to give you a little bit of basic housekeeping rules, and it's not where are the fire escapes. Fortunately, you should all be sitting in your own homes in comfort. There's a mute button. We do and would like questions from you on any of the speaker topics and on the subject of sponsorship, communications or value. We know fully well the sponsorship market in the current COVID-19 period is extremely difficult. Of that, there is no doubt whatsoever. And sponsorship is probably fairly well down the pecking order of things on big corporates or small businesses to issue sponsorship or to look for sponsorship of athletes, teams, and events. We know that's the case, but I think it's important that we start looking towards the light that there is at the end of the tunnel. So without much further ado, our speakers today are Maureen McGonigal from Scottish Women in Sport, and she'll be followed by Duncan Smillie, who's the owner of the Glasgow Rocks basketball team based at the Emirates. And our third speaker today is Hugo Mitchell-Heggs, Lieutenant Hugo Mitchell-Heggs from the Royal Navy, who has been one of the Atlantic rowers in the 2019-20 transatlantic race, winning the military trophy, competing against other military nations. And he's going to talk about how the integration with their mental health charity and how they raise the sponsorship as well, and any advice he can give out. So without much further ado, basically, I would like to pass you over to Maureen, and welcome Maureen. Maureen has a long career working in sport in Scotland and is without a doubt well known and a great stalwart for Scottish women in sport. She's been on various sport advisory boards, chair of Scottish Sports Futures, and the director of social entrepreneurs. She's also been involved as an executive administrator of the Scottish Women's Football Association and the first female Scottish FA Council member, running events for women in sport and certainly beginning to really make an impact with Scottish women in sport. So I'd like to pass Maureen over, who's going to give you a 15 to 20 minute discussion, and then we'll have time for a few questions at the very end after Hugo Mitchell-Heggs. Maureen.
Thank you, Gordon. This is a strange way to be working, but I'd like to say a huge thanks, first of all, to Gordon and to the staff at GRM for making a bit of normality in our lives and for putting this conference on. We always need to know what's happening in the sponsorship field, and I think it's a huge big thank you to you, Gordon. I also hope that everyone that's tuning in is safe and well and that they've managed to manoeuvre their way through this COVID crisis. And I think if we hold on a wee bit longer, we maybe see a wee bit of light at the end of the tunnel. So not that I'm one to contradict a man, Gordon, but I'm not an expert. You have me down as an expert, and that would be a lovely thing to say, but I'm not an expert. But what I do have is perhaps a good few years involvement in sport and a bit of common sense. And what I'd like to do is take you through just a few slides to sort of back up what I want to say. And of course, being involved in Scottish women's sport, my slant is of course on to women in sport, but I think that what I've got to say is perhaps relevant for everyone. So not to repeat ourselves, but I'm the founder of Scottish Women in Sport and the chief executive. And our vision really is for an inclusive Scotland. We're looking for gender equality in all areas of sport. So, I mean, things are changing, things are getting there, and I'm delighted to see that, but we still have got quite a lot of work to do. So Gordon set the scene for us here by saying, how do you approach businesses for sponsorship in the current climate? And what I'm going to do is just really talk around how I think you should do it, what's the best way to do it. And I'd be happy to hear your point of view once I'm finished. So before you make your move, what I would say to you is remember it's a partnership and it should be a win-win for both the sponsor and the athlete. We can't expect to take and not give back. So for me, what I would say is do your homework. So have a little look on the website of the organisation you're thinking of targeting. Find out if they already target sports. What do they do in sports? Is there a link between what you do in your sport and what they deliver? And just make sure you know who you're talking about before you go and talk to them. Ask yourself why. Why am I approaching this company? What am I looking for? Make sure that you've got a clear and concise reason, a clear and concise ask, so that there's no dubiety and you know exactly where you want to go. Everyone's talking about a return on investment, and no matter if you're dealing at a local level, a national level, or an international level, you are going to be looking for a return on investment. So it's important you understand what your return could be. And what I would say nowadays, I think in terms of women, in terms of the wider diversity of people in sport, there are a lot of organisations that do have these types of policies within their organisation. They are probably more likely to listen to your ask from them. So check on their website if they've got a diversity inclusion policy, check if they've got a diversity and inclusion person working for them. And also just make sure that you know exactly why you fit into that particular bracket. Let me go on to the second slide, which I think is very interesting. And it's from the Nielsen Sport Report. And again, it's like we're saying, it's a little bit of hope in terms of women in sport, when they can report that women in sport are one of the most exciting trends in the sports industry just now. And I think if we, if we dig deep enough into the media, we can find these reports that tell you what's happening. I think the Women's League down in England are going to just soar and soar and become quite a league to be reckoned with in terms of finance and the support that's going into them. I think there are other areas in sport, and in Scotland, we have a lot of good Scottish sportswomen. We have a lot of good Scottish sportsmen, so we've got plenty to shout about. So I think that what's said here in the Nielsen report will come to us eventually, and we will be able to reap the rewards in terms of women in sport specifically. Now, the next thing I say is when you make your move, make sure you've got a clear purpose. Make sure that you know why you're contacting this organisation. And the thing that everyone has is a story. And I think if you can manage to tell your story, and again, my focus obviously is women in sport, and there's so many good stories. And I know that from our year in, year out awards dinner. When we hear stories that really the inspiration, the innovation, the hard work, the achievement, they're all there. So you want to tell your story. Are you ambitious? What is your ambitions in terms of an athlete? Let them know that you're ambitious, because then you can grow together as an organisation, as a partnership. You should both be heading towards the same ambition. And if you can let them know early doors what your ambition is, this may be a long-term project for them, and you can work together, and that would be wonderful. Be innovative, whether that be in the way that you approach them. I'm not going to give you any tips on that. I'll let you think of that for yourself. Be innovative in what you're looking for. Remember, it doesn't always have to be financial. You can get great deals and great support in kind from organisations, and they can help subsidise whatever's happening in terms of finance. And always remember to promote the partnership. We have social media now, which I think is the saving grace, particularly for women in sport. There's opportunities there at every turn to be able to promote the partnership. And that is something I think that's a win-win for both. When I say be accessible as well, I'm thinking, there are many times that you as an individual, as a sports person, could go out, talk to their staff, work with their staff. There's ways that you can make sure that you can be connected to them, like an extension of an employee. You are being paid to a certain extent by them, so there is some work to be looked at in return. Never assume that this is a donation. You've got to give something back in return. Now, let me think where we are now. I think in terms of sporting people, we do talk a lot about role models. And I think there's nothing better than creating yourself as a role model for the organisation you're working with. That will go with you in your search, going further and further up the ladder for sports sponsorship. Just give me a little second, because I'm just going down these slides, and this is not the easiest thing. I thought this was another interesting quote. And when you're looking at WWE, I mean, you are saying to yourself, well, that's perhaps one of the strongest sort of male-dominated areas, you would think. But when they're realizing that women are a key part of their sport, they're talking about them being elite athletes in their own right and adding a different dimension. That's what women can bring to the sponsorship market, a different dimension. You have to look at it and how you can be different. You've got to stand out from the crowd. So I think from WWE, that's quite a strong quote there. And I think that, again, is something that we hold on to for the future. I would like to just sort of give you a few bits and pieces of stats that might actually as well give you some hope. And I'm going to stop sharing this screen for a second, because I feel as if I'm talking to myself, and I'm hoping everybody's still with us. Yes, there we are. So in the bigger picture, the growth in the women's sports sponsorship, there's 37% increase in annual number of women's sports sponsorship deals announced between 2013 and 2017. The 49% increase in the average monetary size of the deal between 2013 and 2017. And of women's sports sponsorships, the number of deals completed by clubs, federations and teams has increased. In 2013, there were 7% of the market, and in 2017, they were 19% of the market. So you can see a growth, and that trajectory will just continue. For Scottish Women in Sport, what we've got coming up in the future, we have our virtual awards dinner at the end of this month. So I know what Gordon's going through, because it's not something I'm really looking forward to. It's on the 26th of November. It will be free for anybody to tune in and watch. What that does, it gives us an opportunity to celebrate, recognise achievements of women in sport. And again, if this is something that you happen to have, you want to put that in your sponsorship proposal. Following that, we are hoping to have our conference in 2021. We had to cancel it in 2020, along with everything else that went. And that always looks at topics that impact on women in sport. So again, I would say look on our social media and you will find out what we're doing. We're looking at going into partnership with SAMH. We want to work in some sort of mentorship role with them, and we've had quite a few discussions with them. So I'm hoping that that will get some meat on the bones. One of the areas we have to do is empower young women, make them confident, and then they can go out and take their sport and take themselves into the bigger sporting arena. And we're also doing some promotion with Heart Research UK and some of our female athletes looking at healthy hearts. And the last thing we're looking to do is an inclusion report, and that will be to look at the current status of representation of leadership in Scotland for women. So really that's all I've got to say. It's just a quick, as I say, common sense approach to sponsorship. Always remember it's got to be a win-win, it's a partnership. Be innovative, and can I wish you all good luck with it. These are our social media sites, and if you can see them and you want to follow them, we'd be glad to have you on board. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks very much, Maureen. Really interesting to hear from you, and to hear your putting your points over about women in sport. A number of points that I picked up from your talk there. Women's sport, without a doubt, is showing great growth. Do you think the enhancement of having, for example, women's football on television and women actually, certainly from a GB perspective, you know, winning some major trophies, and the element of they're getting the media coverage now is a big help for sponsors?
I think, yes, it is. Depending on what level you're going in for sponsorship, is definitely a help. But I think what it does, it does enhance the bigger picture of women in sport. And I think it becomes to normalise it. But what we have at the moment is an opportunity for companies to get in at the base level, because we know that this is going to grow. So there's opportunities for companies there. That's why young people have got to be innovative and get in there just now. But there's no doubt all that type of promotion helps, Gordon.
Yeah. And the other point you made there was about SAMH. Just explain, because there are probably some people not from Scotland online here. Just explain how SAMH are. And you know, at your last conference, which I attended, it was quite a big thing. How do you feel tying in something that is now socially inclusive, or to talk about these aspects within the bigger brand of Scottish Women in Sport and the sport element fitting together makes a big difference to sponsors? Do you feel that does so?
Well, I think SAMH is the Scottish Association of Mental Health, and they do a lot of good work with sports. So there's many sports have signed up to their charter. We felt that together there was an opportunity to look at mentoring young women. We know that young women need confidence, they need to be empowered, and SAMH also knows that that's an impact on mental health. So that is definitely a good partnership. Pardon me. Could you give me the second part of your question there, Gordon?
Well, the mix now that a lot of companies, and probably it brings me on to, for example, Hugo, who's going to be speaking a little bit later on, but again, their purpose in rowing, their added purpose was to raise £100,000 for mental health for Royal Navy submariners. And I don't want to steal his thunder on this, but he'll probably go into that a little bit later. But that was a deliberate policy decision to tap in. And we've got speakers on from all over. We've actually got Ailey Suter's father. Ailey was a British snowboarder, and again, about the issues that young women do face in sport with with confidence and things like that, where they're great athletes, but it's all about the headspace, really, that, mental health and other areas that you're beginning to drive into the system. How do you feel that the two of them are binding now? Whereas 10 years ago, it was all corporates. It was brands that were on the front. It was Tennent's Lager that was on the front. Now there's a social responsibility coming in at full. How do you feel that that is now influencing sports sponsorship?
I think it's influencing it, but I don't know if it's not bringing finance in. You know, people are doing that because it's the right thing to do. And I think what they can do is you create strong partnerships to go to sponsors. I think that brings you back a return in that particular situation. So, you know, if you have a particular charity or something you want to support, or you see that the sponsor you are approaching supports a charity, you know, learn a bit more about it. It may be that your involvement with them can help to bring up the awareness of their charity. So again, it's just kind of back to the win-win, doing your homework, knowing who you're approaching, what they're trying to achieve, and supporting them in doing that. So I would agree that I think there is a benefit, but not necessarily financial straight away.
Sure. So it's not about investment. It's not return on investment. It's return on objectives. Your objectives there are to highlight, you know, mental health in athletes, which is great. Maureen, thanks. We'll leave it right to the end, if you don't mind holding it, sitting back and listening to Duncan in the next minute or two. But if we could hold back, and then maybe we'll get some questions in that at the very end of the three speakers, if you don't mind. So it brings me on now to introduce Duncan Smillie. Duncan is the owner of Glasgow Rocks, a successful basketball team that play in the fairly new Emirates Stadium in Glasgow. Duncan's background is that he is the current owner of the Glasgow Rocks, the Scotland's professional basketball team, and that competes in the British Basketball League. He is also a non-executive director within the technology sector, and a board member of Partick Thistle Football Club, which you may want to throw into the pot as well, Duncan, how they're doing. But I'm going to pass you over now to Duncan and hear his take on the headline sponsorship discussion we're having today. Duncan.
Thank you very much, Gordon, and thank you for having me. And kudos to yourself and Alison for having so many people online. I know how difficult it is doing these things and getting an audience, so I doff my cap to you. As Gordon said, I come from more of a business background, quite a corporate background, and then 5 years ago moved back to Scotland after living down south for about 20 odd years, and decided I was done with the corporate world and I wanted to do something that was a bit more fun, and nothing was more fun to me than sport. So I got involved in the Glasgow Rocks by accident and found myself on the board of Partick Thistle by accident. I got thrown off the board of Partick Thistle. I then got put back on it. They got relegated and I bought the Rocks. It was all good fun. And we were top of the British League in March this year with 5 games to go. We were 4 points clear and we were about to win the British Championship for the first time in our 23-year history. And COVID came. So my experiences so far in sport, I'm not sure whether they've been fun, but they actually have. It's certainly a lot more interesting than the technology that I was involved in before. So I'm going to hopefully share my screen here with everybody. I'm assuming people can see that. If you can't see that, then somebody's going to have to let me know in another way. So I only have a couple of slides. And the second one is a video. So you should be seeing a video in a couple of slides time. In fact, there it's there. So I'm assuming that everybody can see this.
Not just now, Duncan, we can't, I don't think. So let's just see.
Okay.
No, have you managed to?
No, I'm just doing the share screen thing. Don't worry.
Just
Here's
the
the guy
screen at the bottom, it should share.
This is the guy who used to work in technology. You see my screen now?
No, still no sign of it, Duncan. The green share screen button at the bottom, if you click on that, that should throw it up and then you should be able to click on it.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay, there we go. That's you.
That's me. Okay. Better late than never.
You're on.
Okay. Can you hear that?
We need some volume, I think, Duncan.
I can hear it.
If you can try and unmute it, Duncan, that would be good.
I am unmuted. The music's not that important.
Maybe if you take your earphones out, Duncan.
So apologies for that.
It's all right, we've got the gist of that from the
Apologies for that. So I've made the right answer to that then. So I'm assuming that people can hear me now. I only have one slide, which it's just as easy to talk through. So hopefully you've picked up there the vibe of the Glasgow Rocks. One of the things that I was very aware of coming into the Rocks was that we were in sport in a city that is dominated by football and dominated by Celtic and Rangers and football. And then we've also got people like the Glasgow Warriors and Braehead Clan, netball with the Sirens, speedway teams. So it was quite a competitive market. So we needed to find a niche and a USP. And when I think back about sponsorship, I've been quite fortunate over the years to get involved in a lot of sponsorship as a buyer, if you like. But for me, sponsorship and sort of hospitality have been hand in hand over the years. And generally what it means is, it means like the boss of the company, whatever their sport is, that tends to be what they invest in. If somebody's into football, it's rugby. And inevitably, if you go along to these events, and they have been in the past, middle-aged men watching sport, getting drunk. And don't get me wrong, I was really, really good at that. And I've enjoyed it. And nobody's kicked ass out of sponsorship and hospitality any more than I have. But thankfully, the world's moved on. So we were looking for a niche at the Rocks and something to be a bit different and be almost anti-football. And I love my football, so I make no apologies for that. But so 80% of the Rocks' income comes for sponsorship. So we need to be very good at this. There are only three sources of income are sponsorship, tickets and merchandise. That's all we have. So I think to have a niche is very, very important. It's a competitive space out there when you're trying to sell sponsorship for yourself as a sports person or as a business. And the idea of people get involved now and going and telling stories about footballers from the 80s, about all the drinking they did and all the women they got involved with, that's past, that's not appropriate anymore. And finding something that's a bit more niche and it's more an ambassador role, and whether that be around how you've struggled with mental health, how you've struggled with adversity or whatever it may be. I think to find a niche and market yourself as something different to everything else that's out there and be able to back it up as well, I think is very important. And Maureen mentioned, and Gordon touched on it in the last presentation about ROI. It's actually very difficult to get a financial ROI on sport. Just by putting a courtside board or a pitch-side board or your name on the jersey of a football team or a rugby team, that doesn't make people go and buy your product. That's not really what it is. So to look for an ROI is important, and where I would suggest is a good place to go looking for it is within a company's CSR budget. So the corporate social responsibility, I find myself, and I take responsibility for the selling of sponsorship at the Rocks. Most companies have, if they don't have an allocated CSR budget, they'll find one, or they'll certainly have a social conscience that wants to get them involved in their community. And it's almost now, when I look for sponsorship, I'm looking for it more at somebody's CSR budget rather than just cold marketing budget, because we know marketing budgets are the first things that get cut. They're seen as luxuries, and they're especially getting cut nowadays. So to market itself at more at a CSR, I think it works, and it's a lot softer a sale. It's a lot easier pitching for a CSR, to do things, to go and deliver a program or a speech or some sort of leadership or mentorship in that company's name. So you're out there delivering their CSR for them. That works for most companies that have a social conscience. It makes it more palatable for them to sign off a check on it. Something else that we've been very successful with at the Rocks, and again, Maureen alluded to it as well, a value in kind or a contra, I refer to it as NWR, so no wallet required. What we have at the Rocks is assets, and our assets are game day. We can't really bring people to a game day just now, but our game day and our players are our assets. So to use them to get stuff from other people. So as an example, we don't pay an accountant. He's a sponsor. We've got a company that launders our kit. They're a sponsor. Where we can, every single sponsor we have, we'd like to get cash and or some other stuff. So we have restaurants, they don't give us cash, but they allow our players to eat there on a regular basis. So it's like getting cash. And if you've got an asset, and if the asset is you as a sports person, to find a way to use that in return for not necessarily a cash sponsorship, whatever it is that you need, whether it be transport, whether it be equipment, whether it be travel, it's just like getting cash. And it's a good way, because if people are giving their assets to you, it typically doesn't cost them as much as it would on a cash sponsorship. And I think the activation is important. Again, Maureen said there that it's not a donation. I've picked up a lot of sponsorship at the Rocks because other sports organisations in our city have really let companies down. And I think it's coming from a commercial background that I have, it's important to me that I do have an activation plan to deliver. If somebody's been good enough to give me either some of their assets on a contra deal or give me some cash, I'm going to have to deliver on it. It's my job to deliver it. It'd be inappropriate, and it's a real cliche, but you don't want them to get sponsorship one year. You want to get for future years. And what I found surprising is that many companies that we deal with don't draw down on the sponsorship, whatever that is. If it's sending us out to a school or sending us out to their place of work or bringing people, our clients, we've almost got to push them. And it seems crazy to me, but what happens is if you don't do the activation part and you don't deliver on your end of the bargain, when it comes to renewing for the following season or the following period, they'll inevitably say, well, it didn't work for us. And you might say to them, it didn't work because you didn't draw down on it. That's not the reason it hasn't worked. You've got to really push it on them and make them get the value. There's a reason why they invested in you and in your organisation or in you as a sports person to deliver. So why wouldn't you deliver at least what they're asking for? And I would suggest more and more companies now, what they want to see social media recognition. They want to see the fact that a player was out at school talking to kids on their behalf, wearing one of their t-shirts, and that you get all the right social tags, handles, all of that stuff that you need. That's what companies want to see to justify to themselves, their shareholders, their partners, their staff. When somebody says, what is it, why are we actually spending this money with this organisation? So you've got to go really big on the activation, in my opinion, because if you don't do it, you will lose sponsors, and you might lose some of them to me. So that's entirely up to you. And I think it's very in keeping that you keep hearing words now where you've got to pivot, you've got to evolve, you have got to do things different. Even though it's a cliche now, we are living in very, very different times. We are not able to bring our sponsors and enjoy the game day with all of their friends and colleagues and clients and all those things. So we have to be innovative. We can't really go out to schools and stand at an assembly and do some mentoring to the kids at the school and then give them some basketball coaching in their gyms and what have you. So that's really tough, because that was our bread and butter. So through the summer, we've been evolving, and we've been creating remote programs where we can deliver to primary school children remote PE lessons introduced by our coaches, having some of our players, 8 or 9 lessons that can be done remotely. That's the sort of thing that we've been doing. And then again, for our sponsors that can't come along to game days, delivering them on behalf of their organisations back to the CSR thing. I think that's the real key for me. If I was a sportsman, heaven forbid, God knows what sport I would play, but if I was a sportsman, I would be going after that CSR budget to make me an ambassador, that I could go and tell a story on their behalf, and that I could go to schools, I could go and discuss mental health, adversity, ideally something that affected me. But that really is the niche for me that you find. And we're in a very different world and have been for many years now. The idea of just going along with the rugby and getting boozed up through some corporate hospitality, there's less and less of that. It's not cool anymore. Companies don't want to be seen to do that. Companies that don't have great reputations want to attach themselves to people or organisations. And if you've got the right story and you've got the right skills, they will attach themselves to you, because companies are, especially sort of the medium to bigger size companies, they're desperate to engage with somebody that's a positive influence on not just their customers, but indeed the whole of the UK and whoever they're speaking to. They want to engage and hang on your coattails while you make them look good. So it would be wrong of you not to go after that, and also to charge top dollar for it. I do agree, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not a train. That's the good news. I think that everybody's already evolved. We're 7 or 8 months into this, and everybody's finding their way in terms of their own business and their own life. And I think as long as you've got a good business, a good product you're selling, whether that be you or your business, there's money out there to be had. There's going to be companies coming out of this wanting to engage with their communities and with role models and organisations that they wouldn't traditionally have done so. I think I'm done there, Gordon, and apologies for messing up my screen sharing. This is the point where you tell me that nobody's been listening to me for the last 15 minutes.
No, I shan't tell you that at all, Duncan. In fact, the participants have actually increased in number since you joined by about 3. So
that's my mum, Auntie Margaret, and Auntie Anne.
Well, listen, that was brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, Duncan, for talking us through Glasgow Rocks and the issues that you're facing over the pandemic, where you can't put bums on seats in the Emirates Stadium, and that is a strong revenue area for you. So I take it, and you mentioned in there, so a quick question for you, and we'll carry on at the very end as well and ask a few more, but you mentioned there that you've got your accountant working for you and you're not paying them. So have you created your budget at the very beginning and you've said, right, accountant, I'm going to be paying X amount for that, so therefore that can come off our budget on our financial line, and instead of having to pay an accountancy firm to do our PAYE and our VAT and our tax and all these issues, you've basically said, come in, and what does that VIK, what do you give back to, for example, you don't need to tell me what you're doing for your accountant, but your VIK sponsor? No, I mean, it's one of the first things I did was look at what we were paying for that we shouldn't be paying for. So the accountant, we're paying £4,000 a year for an accountant for a very basic set of accounts. We found an accountant that was a fan, and we got him to do our accounts for us in return for a courtside board, an advert and a programme, and 4 season tickets. That doesn't cost me anything. And then equally, say we found somebody, we're paying a laundry, 200 quid a week. It's only 200 quid a week, but I'd rather not have to pay that. And there's so many things that fall into that category. I mean, let's say it's like getting cash. It's like getting cash, and it's long. And even like a photographer, loads of people want to be photographers. So rather than me paying £300 for a photographer to come along a game, we've got 4 or 5 photographers that are amateur photographers that are just quite happy to come along
and they get credited with a picture every now and then. So we be as creative as we can, Gordon.
Brilliant, thank you. Just on your other point about activation and delivery, because obviously it's entertainment in reality coming along to the basketball. I mean, it's sport, but it's entertainment. So, you know, your big issue is around, you know, the cheerleading and the entertainment that goes around the basketball court. How are you finding that with COVID? Because you can't hold games. Are you going online? How are you beginning to continue with your sponsorship contracts you've got in 2020? And how are you actually saying to your sponsors, I'm going to satisfy your return, your needs? How are you doing that using different systems rather than bums on seats?
Yeah, I mean, we are, just to cover the first point there, we are, our first game is a week on Sunday, and we are streaming live. We're putting it behind a paywall. We are streaming live on YouTube. So that will be an income from us. I think because we have looked after and delivered and over-delivered on our sponsors, there's only 3 or 4 of them that have actually dropped out this year. And we've tried to be, again, we've created a schools programme that's for primary school kids in Scotland. It could be anywhere, it doesn't have to be in Scotland now, it's online. But rather than me giving you, Gordon, 4 season tickets for you and your family to come along or to bring some of your clients with you, I'm going back, I'm offering a little bit more around the social media promotion, but I'm also going to deliver 3 primary schools in your name. So you're going to send me T-shirts, I'm going to send out players onto our court and deliver online PE lessons for kids in your name. And so it's trying to be creative and for hopefully just 1 season, because we're still hopeful that we'll even get some fans in before the end of our season, which is the end of May. But it's just trying to find creative ways. And ultimately, look, everybody's got to do what they've got to do to survive right now, Gordon. So the sponsors that have had to drop out for a year, I totally get that and respect that. And we're certainly not falling out over it. But most of our sponsors have backed us. And like most of us, we'll remember how people behaved during this difficult period, people that we've done business with over the past 7 or 8 months. And everybody remembers that.
Well, it sounds as though you're the very man to make sure that the relationship's still there, even though for commercial reasons the sponsors have pulled out, and I'm fairly certain that they'll be coming back on stream for you when the games get back to, let's hope, normality in the not too distant future. Thanks very much for that. Well, stay online, please, if you don't mind, while we introduce the next speaker. And obviously at the end we can maybe have some questions from the participants and the audience. Yeah. So thank you, Duncan. Now, this brings us on to our third speaker today, who's Lieutenant, and I must get that correct, Lieutenant Hugo Mitchell-Heggs, who's from the Royal Navy Submarine Corps, based actually, I think, out of possibly Fast Lane. So we were lucky enough to work with Hugo and his team of other Royal Navy submariners on the Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge in 2019-20. And it's a very interesting story he's got to tell all about this, his campaign, how they had to get to the start line, then how they had to get across the ocean above, which made it even more difficult for them. They're generally under the water rather than above the water, and the challenges he faced throughout that. But also their purpose and their core objective was to try and raise £125,000 or £100,000 for mental health associated with the military. So I'd like to pass on now to Lieutenant Hugo Mitchell-Heggs, who's got a great story to tell.
Thank you. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
brilliant.
Can do.
Look, thank you so much, Duncan and Maureen. That was really interesting. Actually, I've taken a few points for my next campaign. Some useful stuff there. Look, ladies and gentlemen, really appreciate you having me. I've not had a huge amount of contact with this side of the world actually since being back from the Atlantic, so it's a real pleasure to be called in for this sort of event. So my name is Lieutenant Hugo Mitchell-Heggs. I'm a serving Royal Navy submariner. I've been in the Navy for the past 10 years. I'm a marine engineering officer by background and trade, which means I'm responsible for a nuclear reactor and teams of technicians and operators on our nuclear submarines. I'm also the Submarine Services Mental Health Champion, which I think will kind of tie into what this is about. And the past 3 years, I've actually been seconded to the Ministry of Defence down in Bristol, where I actually had a bit of headspace to, rather than being deploying all year round and focusing on national defence objectives, I got the opportunity to branch out and create this fantastic campaign, HMS Audacious. So back in 2018, we started a campaign to have 4 serving submariners row across the Atlantic Ocean. And on the 18th of January this year, in 2020, my team and I arrived in Antigua after rowing for 37 days non-stop from the Canary Islands into Antigua. So that was 3,000 miles, where, and the special thing about these Atlantic or ocean rowing challenges is that more people have been to space or climbed Mount Everest. We spent 37 days rowing in shifts of 2 hours on, 2 hours off, all day, every day. And we consumed around 8,000 calories each every day. We faced waves over 40 feet high. That's about the size of a 3-story building. We suffered from seasickness. We got blisters and salt sores on just about every extremity of our body. I won't show you any pictures. And we lost around 18 kilograms, so about 3 stone each during the crossing. But we became the first ever Royal Navy team in history to row any ocean, and we are now the fastest military team in history to row across the Atlantic Ocean. So, really, really special, but the campaign goes way, way back. I'm going to play you a very short clip now of our our arrival into Antigua, a very special moment with my team, and then we'll start talking about sponsorship.
We crossed the finish line, we lit the flares, we had our moment to ourselves. So it was like a beautiful moment for the team just to kind of, well, you guys are finished, this is it. You see that little marina lined with hundreds of people cheering you in. At the front of that, girlfriends, wives, children, families, parents, and it's just really special.
Right now I'm battered, I feel tired, I feel sore, but absolutely the best thing I've ever done.
It's testing, challenging, it unlocks parts of you that you didn't realise were there.
The most amazing stupid idea I've ever had.
So in 2018, I just freak chance was talking to a friend who told me about the Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge, nicknamed the world's toughest row, for all the right reasons. And I immediately thought that we needed to have a Navy team take part. And as a submariner, it only made sense that I make it all about our own little special side of the service. Great opportunity for us to showcase a very covert community. Many know a lot about the Royal Navy. There seems to be documentaries and adverts all the time about the Navy, but the submarine service being a particularly covert community, it's very difficult to showcase what we're all about. So for me, I thought this would be a great chance to showcase our people and what we're about, our culture in a slightly different environment rather than getting cameras down a submarine. Although coincidentally, just complete freak coincident chance, if you've got the TV on tonight on Channel 5 at 9 p.m, there's a one-off rare documentary about life on board the Trident submarines that we operate. Worth having a look if that kind of thing floats your boat. No pun intended. But look, the biggest challenge with these things, there was that lovely moment there you saw, and the 37 days before that. But actually, the biggest challenge is getting to the start. £130,000 to buy a boat, the loose equipment, the rations, the safety gear, the shipping expenses, logistics, flight, race fees, so on. It's quite a task just getting to the start line on its own. And it's not an official military sport. We are very lucky to have a lot of sports funded for our people in the services, but this wasn't an official one, which meant that we were going to have to do this ourselves without public funding. It was all going to have to be done privately, and we're going to have to build a really good sponsorship campaign to make this happen. And often you'll find with these types of adventures and challenges, the Everests and the South Pole treks and so on, is people don't do it. I mean, I'm sure many of you would love to go and do something like that, but people don't go and do it because it's just so overwhelming. The steps you have to go through financially, and unless you've got a trust fund or a mega sponsor, or you're really clued up, or a professional athlete or a celebrity, it's kind of gets a bit difficult. And there isn't a blueprint. There isn't a blueprint of how to do this easily. It's there are ways of getting there, but there isn't a standard process. So and that's take my word here as lip service, because it worked for us. It may not work for others, but the great thing that we had was we had a blank canvas. And the first thing I would always do with a blank canvas is learn from others. Exactly as you are now, you're attending this presentation. I went and I spoke to professional sailors, to athletes, and I spoke to previous people who rode oceans or climbed mountains, and I asked them how you do it. What to do. I took them out for coffee, or I take them out for lunch. That small gesture of goodwill, and just extract. Just sit there and extract. Notepad and pen. How they ran their campaigns, what they did well, what their regrets were, what went right, wrong, and looking across the board, holistically at the whole campaign, not just the actual crossing itself, and what kit they took and what worked for them, and their scary moments and what they do differently, but all their bits with the team, but also how they went about sponsorship. And you'll find that so many did it differently. You had organizations or teams that were lucky enough to have a title sponsor, a big bank or a company who bought the whole thing, funded it, bankrolled it all, created their own campaign with them, and they had a title sponsor. Fantastic, very lucky to have that. And then you saw others who played the local element, who had 5,000 logos on their boat because they went to every single shop in their local town and local county, and they became the Yorkshire team or the Scottish team or the whatever. It was all about that local element. There's no right or wrong answer. But having sat down and realized that there wasn't a blueprint, there wasn't that process, I could start to build a framework with my crew. And we built this framework here. That's what allowed us to get from day zero, blank canvas, to being a competitive crew with all the right kits, on day zero of our Atlantic crossing. Our framework was broken down into 4 objectives. We had our first one was all about PR. It was all about raising the profile of our submarine service, showcasing submariners, about our ethos, inspiring the public, trying to inspire our own community. Showing the people, the friends and families and veterans that there are exciting things to be inspired by, to get behind, and it can be harnessed in so many ways. For us, for the Navy in general, this has been a great opportunity for recruitment, for outreach, for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Getting us in schools and showing that actually ocean rowing is scientific, it is technical. There are problem-solving elements to it, and that there's a really great element of outreach that you can harness there. And of course the link it has to charity, and actually the PR bit, objective 1, links so closely in with all 3 other objectives as well. But essentially this was the foundation of our comms plan, and developing a really robust comms plan goes hand in hand with sponsorship and fundraising, or certainly I noticed that. Having a good comms plan will only lend itself well to your other objectives. I mentioned earlier that we do mental health championships, something really close to our hearts. It's something that's, we've been unfortunate enough to have seen not just veterans, but serving people really, really suffer with mental health issues because of the environment that we've operated in. It's a challenging professional environment, but it's as long as the right support metrics and amenities are there, we can do something to look after our people and the families, the most overlooked part of all, the families of our serving lot. So we wanted to build a campaign around mental health championship, about well-being, about mental health, about promoting, and this tied really closely with our comms plan, and what we were going to become ambassadors for, what our brand was going to be about. We wanted to be a brand, HMS Audacious. You would think HMS Audacious and start thinking mental resilience, mental well-being, charity. adventure, you know, those kind of things. So that was really important. Objective 3, developing partnerships, you know, and this is where we talk about that £130,000. Developing partnerships, I put here, developing partnerships that add value to the submarine community. We needed that £130,000 to fund ourselves, so we needed sponsors. But for us, sponsorship wasn't, or partnership, sorry, wasn't just about money. It was about complementing all the other objectives. And that's where it's about building relationships and collaboration. You know, as Duncan put so well a moment ago, you know, it's about trying to harness all those organizations and people who already have an invested interest in what you're doing. You know, so we use this as an opportunity to build ourselves, become ambassadors within the Sea Cadets. You know, we were there, we'd spent hours and hours doing talks and workshops and leadership and teamwork events with children, school kids, Sea Cadets, and then running this very similar sort of events in the corporate space with FTSE 100 organizations and, you know, enormous companies, and you'll see in a minute, or enormous companies down to, you know, your family run business out of a garage kind of thing. And then finally, and I'll talk more about objective 3 in a minute, because I know this is what this talk is all about, but the objective 4 was charity. You know, charity, you know, whether that's fundraising, awareness, or comms, you know, the full spectrum of that See, Think, Do model. We chose our charity. We chose to ring fence funding within the mental health and wellbeing pool. So kept our charity objective very close to our mental health championship objective. And, you know, and that allowed us to help develop our brand even further. We weren't just submariners. We weren't just Navy guys going to have a you know, physical challenge. We were all about something a bit different. We had that kind of holistic edge to ourselves. You know, I come back to what sponsorship is. You know, and you know, I talk about the boat that had one sponsor and the boat that had 5,000 sponsors, logos covering them. You know, we had 52 organizations that we reached to, and they were all so different. You know, similar. You know, we and I'll talk about how we approached them, but it was about showing them that sponsorship isn't just advertising. You know, it's not just about sticking a logo on the kit. It's about aligning values. It can be about brand alignment and you know, supporting charity and adventure. But very quickly learned, and I mentioned earlier, nuclear engineer, nothing to do with brand management or marketing. Lucky enough to have my partner's a marketeer in you know, some quite you know, decent environments. So I got to, you know, pick up a few things over the course of her career. But it's you know, we had to learn the hard way that organizations are motivated by different outputs, you know, and that, you know, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. You know, and it can come in many forms. It can come as a you know, it can come as a financial transaction, or in my preference, a relationship. I think that sponsorship is all about building that relationship, having conversations, you know, whether it's about, you know, brand alignment or aligning those values. You know, we had many themes that we could look at aligning with, you know, whether it was military, charity, adventure, you know, the resilience, the mental health, the tech, the engineering, the STEM. And again, as I keep emphasizing, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. So we did a bit of both. You know, talk about the extremes of you know, how these adventure brands go about their business. We engaged organizations close to our community. You know, that's the easy way. That's the easiest thing to do. You know, why branch out to people who've got nothing to do with you when you can you know, knock on the door of those who are close to you already. You know, so we looked at the defense organizations that support our community. You know, defense industry. You can see lots of their names up there. But we also thought, you know, once you start gaining that momentum and start building a bit of credibility through the comms plan, you know, developing a social media following, developing some good content, that's when actually the timing of our comms plan allowed us to start reaching out to adventure brands. You know, actually, we weren't just the defense team, the submariners rowing. We were suddenly a rowing team with, you know, capturing nice content. You know, we went and trained out in the west of Scotland, in the Irish Sea, and there was something quite special about that. So we could start leaning towards, you know, the sports brands, the adventure brands, you know, and luckily, you know, being Submariners, we're still quite niche. You know, there's quite a large pool of military people trying to, you know, who are, you know, you'll see them on TV, from the very high performing and very successful Ant Middletons and SAS Who Dares Wins type people, to people just trying to you know, start forging that path for themselves. And luckily, you know, we're still quite niched. We're still quite an untapped resource. We're still quite new. We're still a bit of a novelty. There's people started showing a bit of interest in that. It was creating content around something that has not had huge exposure. It was really, you know, really helpful for our campaign. I agree with you, Maureen, though. It is about relationships, and there is an exchange. You know, there has to be an exchange, a return. You know, whether that's you know, just brand affiliation, which is enough for some. You know, just having their brand associated with you, or actually, a lot of our sponsors were very happy to have their brand associated with some quite prestigious brands. You know, that was quite nice for them to be, you know, put next to some, you know, another brand that they recognized as you know, as something they wanted to be seen near. You know, that was as useful, but you need that momentum to get there. So what else can we offer when you've got not much to offer? You know, we're military guys. We had limited resources at our disposal to give back. You know, we were lucky enough that we could offer a talk to staff. We could talk to schools. We could go and give a leadership or a team building event. But we could also, you know, we also had our own events that we could put together, charity events, galas. And also one of those things that we tapped into really early, long before COVID, was the virtual space. You know, we created virtual rowing challenges. And the reason for this is, unlike that, you know, we talked about the support the local Yorkshire team. My team came from, you know, one of my crewmates was from you know, Kirkcaldy in East Scotland. We had a Northern Irish lad, a lad from Portsmouth, and I'm over from the West Country. You know, we're scattered around the country. You know, we weren't the local team. We were the military team, but we weren't the local team. So we had to create some virtual events. You know, we used we did, you know, sort of those typical what everyone's doing this year. We did last year. We did a kind of virtual rowing challenge. We did it with Sea Cadets. We had 20,000 Sea Cadets who rowed the distance of the Atlantic in one weekend because they had the numbers. And we also created a rowing challenge that's still going, if any of you fancy a row, where we managed to get military people to go and take on a 50k rowing challenge on warships, on submarines. And then we opened it to the public. We allowed the public to compete with military people who were out in, you know, east of Suez and the Atlantic, wherever. And suddenly there was that, you know, it was that kind of that competition between Joe Bloggs or Company Y could suddenly pit themselves against a whole new community. So there was a bit of novelty to it. So this is back to what, you know, really, you know, rung true with me what Maureen said earlier. It's about being innovative and finding ways that you know, find an idea that's just a bit different, that no one's doing. At the moment, if we try that this year, you'd just be another fundraiser happening in the, you know, and it's how you get yourself out there as a whole, you know, a whole challenge in its own right. But yeah, so that is the breadth of our campaign. You know, the key thing that we had, and obviously 2019 was a whole different year. We had huge events schedule. You know, we could go to regattas, we could go to defense shows, we could go to these types of events where you bump into people, you have that accidental conversation, and suddenly 2 days later you've got a sponsor. You know, and the number of those logos on that boat, where it was a freak conversation in a queue for something that led to a friend of a friend, you know, wanting to show that support, was invaluable. So that is also it's one of those things. It becomes a full-time lifestyle. It's not just a job. It becomes a full-time lifestyle. You have to just never shut up about it, because you just never know when that opportunity is going to come. So, I mean, back to those 4 objectives, that framework, we were lucky enough, you know, we had a year to get this, 18 months, 15 months between starting it, building the framework and getting to the start line of the Atlantic. And over that time, we reached over 10 million people. We continue to promote mental health and resilience, and we are very much spending the £100,000. Actually, we raised £110,000 for charity, and we are well on our way to spending that because there's such a need for it, which is really good. We engaged 52 organisations, from corporates to small businesses, trusts, charities, and youth organisations, and because it's all been so interesting and so novel, so new, and engaging. It's given us the appetite to do it again. So we're doing it again in 2022. In fact, we're looking to aim to have HMS Audacious as its own brand, carry on taking submariners to row across the Atlantic. We've got our first mixed crew, 2 males and 2 females, going to row across the Atlantic in 2023. And my dream here is to see, in 20 years' time, when I've got no hair on my head, to still see young submariners going and putting themselves, challenging themselves against the conditions of the Atlantic, inspiring people, doing some great work for charity, and being great ambassadors for not just the service, but the causes, that mental health promotion and stigma fighting that we're all about. So hopefully that's been helpful. I've got contact details on there if any of you ever want to discuss any of this further. But look, I'll hand this back to you, Gordon. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Hugo. Absolutely fantastic to hear that, and brilliantly put. We had the fortune of working with you during the Talisker Atlantic Challenge. One question there that I found, having worked for the last 25 years in sport and sponsorship and things, one thing you mentioned there was one of the most important things you had there was a comms plan. Now, to work with you in the military and to see a comms plan that was quite superb, your comms plan was first class. But your comms plan was critical to creating your value. What elements do you feel of your comms plan really added to allow your brands, along the myriad of brands that you brought in as sponsor, how important was your comms plan?
Crucial, but the comms plan only works if it's based on that framework. So we had those key objectives were the basis of our comms plan. So we had, whether it was the showcasing the military and the submariner and the values and that kind of bubble of it, the mental well-being, the adventure side of it, the rowing, which I didn't put on there, but that's obviously the vehicle. The rowing was the actual vehicle to allow all this to happen. And of course, the charity bits and the affiliations with all those organizations. That generated content. That gave us something to work towards. And then the rest of it is about a timeline. It's about that zero to hero, where you've got a crew of people who've never stepped foot on a rowing boat before, who've crawled off a submarine, and getting them ready, getting them ready for the Atlantic. People are fascinated in the journey. They're almost more interested in the actual journey to the game. Whether it's rowing or the number of movies you've got on Netflix and Amazon Prime at the moment that are the behind the scenes, Last Chance U or Tottenham or whatever. People want to know what's going on behind the scenes. They want to know what's happening in the build-up. So that document it. Put it in there, create content. That's what we did, and that was quite hard. I had the difficulty of working with blokes who aren't very good at social media, who don't like taking selfies, who don't like doing stuff, like that. But it was about learning how to just, you're at the gym, take a photo and share it, and write a little story about motivation. You're out on the water. Let's do a little funny video interview. And it's just about creating content non-stop, because that engages, it captures imagination, and it leads to the actual Atlantic bit itself. So that's huge.
I mean, obviously that's difficult for you, because in theory, the Royal Navy, as submariners, you're treated in exactly the same way as special forces, whereby you're instructed basically not to promote. But with your task there, your job was to challenge that and promote above the water. Well, most of the time, apart from the one time you did capsize, where you decided you were trying to have a look underneath for submarines, I'm sure at the end. Tell us a little bit about your capsize, just out of interest.
Oh, the capsize. Yeah, it was we're about 500 miles from Antigua. We'd gone through. We had a really rough start to the crossing, then a really calm middle bit. So it's very easy to get complacent, and then suddenly, we're only a few days away from finishing the crossing, 4 or 5 days away, and the weather went crazy. It went huge winds, for sort of 40, 50 mile an hour winds. The waves just suddenly went from flat calm to the size of buildings, and we that's good. You're moving quite fast, but we were surfing down these 40-foot waves, and I was actually asleep at the time. I was in the back cabin of that boat, and we suddenly went upside down. I had about 50 liters of water came in through the vent. Everything that was in the pouches of the cabin came out. And it was the first time I've ever felt like I was actually in a human-sized washing machine. But it was really special because it was the two guys who were on deck. One of them got spat into the sea, life harnessed on, straight back onto the boat, a chipped tooth. And when they got the boat, the two guys on deck took charge of the situation to put us in a safe position, because the guys in the cabins, you don't want to be opening the hatches, because that's where you could get more water in and the boat might not come, pop back around or self-right from the capsize. So they got us in a safe position. We were able to come on, make sure that the guys weren't too bruised or injured. And then the whole thing is it's about recovering from that. That's overcoming that adversity. And this is a separate talk that I like to do about adversity, but it's about finding the fun in everything. And immediately we realized that we hadn't lost anything except my trainers. They'd floated off into the middle of the Atlantic. My brand new Reebok Nanos had floated off into the middle of the Atlantic, so I had to row barefoot for the last 5 days. In fact, Matty had lost one trainer, so I was rowing barefoot. He was rowing with 1 foot for the last 5 days. And there's something hilarious about that. It's just quite special. No, back to what you said about the media side of it, though. Yeah, we had that was another difficulty. We had to make sure that everything we said was within the remits of the Navy media governance and the plans. What you can and can't say. We can't be promoting, and that's where you've got to very much be selective of your brands that you want to affiliate yourselves with. We couldn't, associate ourselves with alcohol, tobacco, gambling, and all those kind of things, because that's the nature of the environment we work in. So that's. Well, I mean, that's the title sponsor of the race. Yeah, that had its own challenges for us as well. Don't get me wrong. That caused us some headaches with the governance, being able to get that through our own processes. But, that's where you just got to be careful. Do you want, we talk about brand association. Do you want to be associated with a brand that is known for something that might discredit what you're trying to do, what you're about? There's so you got to be careful. That's where that is one other thing is, being not that exclusivity has got to be, you can't go and like have a fast food brand sponsoring you, but to be working for kind of child obesity charity. That you have to manage your audience and pick it. Be very selective. Alcohol and mental health. There's
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But the point I raised about the capsize 500 miles out from Antigua, after you've rowed the Atlantic and taken a photograph of a boat so many times, it just becomes wallpaper. And it was quite interesting the way you described the story, because what you did there was you created value in content. People want to hear about how you were you capsized in your boat in a 40-foot wave. They want to hear the story. It's the same as the television program you can watch. I think it was on last night, Rock the Boat, which is using the same boats, but they're doing it with celebrities, and it's nothing like in comparison to what you as Atlantic challengers had to take on. It's fairly light and fluffy in comparison. But what you do with that is you've created there is now the whole development of the sport is now developed into a 7:30 primetime TV celebrity television show with athletes coming in it from another side. And it's guys like you that have created that. But that's all about value creation, which you've got to do first. Hugo, absolutely great. Thank you very much for giving us that. Now, I suppose what we've got is we've got a couple of questions that came in, and I'm going to start the first question And I'll maybe go round you all individually in order, Maureen, then Duncan, if you could answer this question, the first question. I should have it here. I don't know if put it under here. One sec. So, yeah, sorry. First question, which came in from Laura Camage. Laura is, yeah, Laura. So Laura sent in a question, and the first question is, what do sponsors want to see in an athlete's application and sponsorship request back, or the letter? How would a sponsor, how would a young athlete who is fairly good at their sport, and they need some support to get them to the start line of their next, their pathway, they're on the pathway. So Maureen, I'll maybe start with you. What do you feel, what approach should a young athlete take to a business? And let's categorize a business as being a fairly mid-size range local business for them, if we're talking about an athlete like Laura Camage who's on the pathway.
Okay, well, having listened to everyone else, I think we've all got sort of common threads going round us. And I go back to what I said at the start in terms of doing their homework, make sure that they're approaching the right company for them. But what I would say is we've also spoken a lot about social media and being innovative. So, I mean, I could give you the stock answer that, probably other people would do, but being innovative, make a TikTok, do something different, catch the attention, stand out, would be my advice. Everything else you can read off a book, but, do something that reflects you, that gets your story over. And if you feel comfortable in front of social media, making a little video, get some clips of you in action, get some action photographs, do a PowerPoint presentation, just make something different that they want to sit down for a couple of minutes and have a read through it. It's not just picking up a piece of paper like a CV, because that doesn't really resonate very well.
No, brilliant, absolutely. No, you're absolutely bang on. Duncan, what are your thoughts on that same question? What do sponsors want to see from a young athlete in their approach? What would a corporate business, and this is maybe taking you out of your Glasgow Rocks, but taking you back into your corporate business side, what would turn you on? What would you get you excited about that athlete?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I totally agree with what Maureen said there, to be innovative. And I think we all hate it when we get a pitch that you can tell is just a total cut and paste standard pitch from somebody for business of some sort. So I think to put a wee bit of research in and make it personal, and to look for, we've all touched it in a way there, and Hugo and Maureen have done the same, whether it's somebody local to you or somebody that's got a bit of empathy with your sport, or ask them, like, don't be afraid to ask them, even before I want to make a pitch at you, what is it you're interested in? But I think to find a bit of empathy, but to put a wee bit of research into the business and or the individual that you're actually pitching at, because if you find out that that's a parent whose kid does the same sport, or who's local to you, you've seen them advertising. I'm forever going to sport. I take pictures of all the advertising boards everywhere I go sports-wise, and then I'll hit them up as well. And companies that put their own sponsors on their websites, I'll go and look at, put the research in and put the long yards in, because I think anybody's going to appreciate that, Laura. I think if you put the effort in and you pull at their heartstrings or get that bit of empathy, you stand a far better chance of getting a result.
What amount of research do you think an athlete puts in? I mean, I find, coming from this professionally, that athletes it's all about looking from the outside in rather than the inside out. We use that a lot in sponsorship. It's not about you, it's about who you're approaching. Find out how they would fit, what you could deliver for them to enhance their reputation, increase awareness of their product, fit in. You could be an ambassador for that product because you're a good athlete and therefore you're drinking that product. So therefore that's a good reason for them to sponsor you. You have to do that research. What research do you think they would need? Somebody like, using basketball as an example, a young basketball player looking for some support to get themselves into the Glasgow Rocks, how would they go about getting sponsorship?
I think, and again, I think the younger the sports person is, and the more minority a sport, the more keen the effort are sports people to put in. My experience, I work with a few elite sports people and some other thing I do, and they're a nightmare to let me do anything in terms of looking for sponsorship or an activation. I think not if you're a young basketball player or you're a young runner, the sport's actually irrelevant. For you to find out who sponsors at peer level to you, who sponsors your heroes, and to go back to them to say, I'm going to be the next whoever that person is there for Laura. I think that's it's. And again, don't just send 100 emails on an email blast. Be very, very specific. Use a sort of sniper approach rather than a scattergun approach, and research the company. Why are they going to sponsor you? Give them a good reason to. But I think find out what it is. Where is the empathy that you can find with them, whether they're local to you or they're involved in the sport through their friends or family, or they sponsor somebody else. But put the effort in. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it.
Hugo, obviously your boat had quite a lot of MOD or quite a lot of people who were involved with the military or suppliers. Did you take a very targeted approach to your sponsors, and how many, you weren't sending out a scattergun approach. Talk us through how you decided where your targeting would be for sponsorship.
I learned this the hard way. Actually, I really like what Duncan said there about the scattergun versus sniper approach, because I learned that the hard way. I made the mistake of being the naive athlete and literally copying and pasting a pitch and throwing it to as many out there as possible and getting nothing back, and being really worried that I was doing it the wrong way. And then I actually realized that, as soon as I started being able to engage the right people and start learning what that company was about. And this is where actually doing the research is really important, because you start understanding that each company has values, has a stance on what you're passionate about. The mental health thing is a super hot topic at the moment in industry. So we were able to start aligning on those kind of things and showing that, we're more than just some athletes asking for a donation. We're about something that we can start aligning on a little bit more. So actually that was really helpful. It was also about knowing who your audience was, so knowing who you're pitching to, and then in some cases, if you've got a better chance of approaching via someone else, asking for someone to make that introduction. So networking, it's always easier than, the number of times I made a phone call, I called up an organization, I said, great opportunity, Atlantic Rowers, blah, blah, blah. And I got, oh, great, can you put that in an email to admin@wewon'treply.com, kind of thing. It's there were tons of those. So it was about knowing who to approach internally. And this is where it's hard to know, because it could be the perfect company for you, but you've just approached the wrong person, or you approached the wrong team. The budgets are another interesting one as well, with timing. Like there are a number of organizations who wanted to support us, but you approached them in at the end of their financial year, and they've committed everything for the next, and it's about timing as well. So it's starting, if you're a young athlete and you need money now, like this is going to be challenging, because you have to almost think a financial year ahead. That's the other challenge. That's why these ocean crossings tend to be planned 2 years before they start, because you're having to start looking at the financial year, ahead of where you are at this moment in time, because there's all that planning and consolidation that needs to go into it before you actually get a check in your hand and an exchange.
Well, without a doubt, it's all about the planning and preparation. It's an iceberg. You've got to really look at what's below the surface. Sorry to use the pun with you, but it's below the surface. All the planning and preparation and comms is critical to sponsorship. If you've not got that in place and you're not driving out there to create value, asking for sponsorship is almost a pointless exercise. Now, we've got loads of questions. There's actually a question came in from a couple of guys from over in Switzerland, but I'll leave that question till a little bit later on. I'll ask this question. This came in from an anonymous attendee, but the first question is, how do sports find out who the best person within a company that can make the decision to progress a sponsorship deal find out? So Duncan, how would you answer that? How does sports, I assume they mean sports teams or sports people, find out who the best person within a company is? Unmute yourself, Duncan.
Yeah, I spent most of my life in sales, and most sports people that are looking for sponsorship, and Hugo alluded to it there, aren't salespeople, and they're lucky they're not, because it's not easy being a salesperson. But what that is, that's cold calling, and that is really, really tough. It's one of the hardest things to do. I think there's a lot of tools. There's a lot more stuff online now. LinkedIn is a great tool. I think it's the only form of social media I use. Get in too much trouble using other stuff. But in LinkedIn, you can tend to find out, search people by companies. And it's amazing how easy it is to find in LinkedIn that you're actually connected to somebody through somebody else that comes back to asking for that introduction. I just sent, like, about half an hour ago, sent an invitation to Hugo. I want to meet with him. Why wouldn't I? But I think LinkedIn is a great thing. Sending an email to info@, you're going to be very, very lucky to get a response on that. But ultimately, it can come down to picking up the phone and asking. And if you're open and honest with people, and just to ask who would be the best person to speak to, it might be the marketing department, it might be the person who owns a business, but to pick up the phone or to do a bit of research on LinkedIn, or just by Googling what you want to find out. I tend to find that if you actually Google what you want to find out, you often find yourself there after you've gone down a few rabbit holes.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and I totally agree with you completely there. One of the biggest deals I ever did, which was for the funding of or the sponsorship of an international racing yacht, was at a reception evening where I gave the gentleman 2 free glasses of red wine. Ultimately, 5 days later on, he gave us 4.7 million euros. So you've just got to be very careful who you speak to at these receptions. I didn't know him from Adam, and he basically eventually put 4.7 million euros into the hands of the yacht racing team because I handed him a glass of red wine and introduced him to a couple of people. So you have to be very, very careful. And a lot of things are done by personal contact, networking events. LinkedIn, without a doubt, you should be a member of that. You don't get too many chances as well to go out to sponsors. It's not a Mars bar. There's not loads of them in the box. When you approach a sponsor, your research and your homework and everything that you do must be bang on before you go out there. You have to do your research on the company, the person, the individual, finding out what their sport, their interest is, and making sure they've got some form of alignment, with you. So I've found that over many years. But another questions came in from another anonymous attendee. Maureen, for you really, would it help to have a number of sports or sports people approach a sponsor collaboratively to try to get a sponsor to cover several people in their sport rather than individually? Maureen.
I'd been a bit sneaky had I actually checked out the questions, and I'd answered the last question with both LinkedIn and networking. So now I'm stumped. I don't know if that would work. I mean, that's quite unusual, but that's what we're talking about, innovation. If there's something collectively, if it's community, I think community-wise it would work, bringing together different sports, trying to help the local community. As you move up in terms of getting to be elite, I'm not sure whether that would work or not, but it's always worth a try. You'll never know if you don't try.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think the question there is that what they're trying to do, I think if you're a team, then obviously if you're a team, a football team, and you're looking for sponsorship, that then is an easy route to go. But sometimes it might be quite difficult if you've got individual athletes all trying to pull together. You would need to be very specific and maybe look to say, look, can we get some support? We're all competing against each other, but there's 6 of us all competing in the same sport, but we all train together so that we've got training partners on the pathway. That might be a route I would suggest that could be worth going. But I know having, my daughter being involved in an individual sport, they do and have had sponsors sponsor the group of them, but not when they're actually racing. It'll be more for part of the pathway system and get them to the race and to the start line. But then
I think the other thing you've got to understand that there's a finite amount of money. So if a company is going to invest in sport and they've looked at their budget, whether you're 6 people or 1 person, that budget may not change. So you then say to yourself, is it worthwhile going into the collaborative, or should we all support each other in getting a good proposal together and target different companies? So it really is, it's about talking to each other, it's about supporting each other and helping each other to get the best out of the individual. and then, collectively go on LinkedIn and look for it. But, really there should be enough firms out there to support depending on what you're looking for.
Great, thank you, Maureen. Well, I think we're heading up to 5:30 just now, and we said we'd try and finish the event between 5:30. Our final event will take place in two Wednesdays, and we're running that right through till 6 o'clock. A nice question that's came in from David O'Neill. He'd like to offer all our speakers a bottle of red wine. So obviously, David, you've enjoyed it. I'd like to thank Maureen McGonigal from Scottish Women in Sport, Duncan Smiley from Glasgow Rocks, and Hugo Mitchell-Higgs from the Royal Navy and HMS Audacious. Contact them all on LinkedIn. I'm sure they will not object to any questions you've got, any support they can give you in the sponsorship field, and they've got the experience of doing that. But make a point of taking some notes from tonight, and hopefully you'll all join us next Wednesday at 4 o'clock. I'd like to thank QTS, our sponsors for the webinar as well. QTS have supported us through these 4 webinars. They were the conference sponsors. I'd like to thank Alan McLeish and his team for doing so. But hopefully, unless let you all get to dinner time now, 5:30 on Wednesday, and hopefully we'll see you all next Wednesday evening. Thanks to all my panelists, and thanks to all the delegates who've attended. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good luck.
Just